So my name is Sam. I graduated from Tulane University with my Master's of Science in Historic Preservation earlier this year in May. And I was very lucky to get to go to Tiwanaku um, in Bolivia. And this photo on my first slide is the Puerta del Sol, which is one of the stones that I will tell you about momentarily. So just to talk a little bit about the project location. You can see here, it's in Bolivia, right on the near the border of Bolivia and Peru, in an area along the Andes mountain range called the Altiplano, which is one of the most extensive high plateaus in the world. I think it's second only to Tibet. So I'm from Colorado in the US, and I thought that I knew altitude and elevation. I do not, I found out. So the elevation here, for context, Denver is, I think, 5,280 feet. The elevation here is 12,500 feet or 3,800 meters for my friends not from the US. Um, so it was very high. It was a very interesting experience to be in that climate. And so you can see it's near La Paz, which is the capital city, and then Lake Titicaca. Um, and then Cusco is another really, there are a lot of significant archaeological sites and ancient sites around here. So talk a little bit about the history here. Okay. So just to begin with the history of the site, this is a picture from 1903 that I really love. Uh, so it was declared a World Heritage Site in 2000. It is a pre-Incan ancient site, so it was active from about 500 to 1000 AD as the first major city-state in this region, and occupied by the Tiwanaku people, who the current Aymara indigenous people in Bolivia trace their roots back to the Tiwanaku people and claim this area as their ancestral homeland. So it was just really cool to be able to work here and be a part of something so significant and sacred to so many people. So a lot of different people have occupied this area. The Incans started occupying it in the 1400s. The Spanish arrived in the 1500s, and Europeans and Americans started to do like excavations and taking a scientific interest in it starting in the 1800s and throughout the 20th century. And so the site has obviously changed dramatically over time. It looks very different now than it did in this 1903 photo. There's been a lot of like reconstructions, extensive looting of the site. I like this photo because you can see the church in the background in the village. That church was built during the Spanish period with stones from the site, and a lot of the houses in the village have stones from the site as well. So yeah, as I said before, a lot of sacred and political meaning, and it's even been the center of struggle between the Aymara people and the government in Bolivia in the past for its symbolic significance. So the sculptures here also are very unique, and I'll show you pictures of those in a moment, but well, I'll talk about them then. So basically, for the history of this project specifically, it was declared a World Heritage Site in 2000. In 2015, the site management came up with a management plan, which included a section for recommendations for conservation, including mapping pathologies of heritage assets. And so this project actually began a few years before my time with them. So the partners were the National Center for Preservation, Technology, and Training, which is located in Natchitoches, Louisiana. And that's where I spent also part of my internship. And they were partnered with the Utah Valley University, and then the US Embassy in Bolivia to do this work. So they were already doing documentation of the stones, mapping of the site, and different things. My part of the project was really to help develop a conservation report and guidelines for the site's stones specifically. So This is a little bit different than I think the site has been interpreted in the past because it was an archaeological site for so long, specifically, and really focused on excavations and scientific analysis of those. Um, in the last like 50 years, there has been slightly more of a conservation focus and looking at it also as a cultural landscape and looking at that material culture of the stones. So here are the really amazing monuments, sculptures that I got to work on. They're really special because they're all monolithic subtractive sculptures. So this means they were carved out of a single piece of stone through this process of subtracting material to create a final form, which is just like a technologically and artistically awe-inspiring thing. So starting on the upper left, this is El Fraile, which is the only one that could potentially be in its original position. All of the rest of these were excavated at some point and placed in the spots that they're in now. The one in the middle top is the Sun Gate or Puerta del Sol, which is one of the most famous and significant sculptures. And then there's the Moon Gate right next to it. Descapizado is the lower left, which means without a head. His head is gone, unfortunately. And then there are these sculptures, these three in these middle two photos, which are in the subterranean temple. And you can see they have deteriorated a lot. They're sandstone. All the three in the on the left and the bottom, three photos are all sandstone sculptures. And then there's this one on the right, El Ponce. So this is a kind of a legend of just, or a map of where they are on the site. Um, there is this big square in the middle, which is the Kalasasaya temple. It's this picture I showed earlier. Go back here. All of these stones, there have been stones like reconstructed, I think in the 1950s between these, making kind of like a raised temple. And so that's this area. And then the one next to it, HIJ, with those three subterranean sculptures, that is like a below ground subterranean temple. And the stepped feature in the bottom right of the screen is the Akapana Pyramid. I didn't do much work over there, but I did get to tour it and learn about it, and it was amazing. And then kind of there are a couple outside of those bounds. So D up in the left corner is the Moon Gate, and then G is Desca Posado, and C is the Sun Gate. Okay, so just to talk a little bit about what I actually did on site. So I was on site for 3 weeks. I got to work with Rusty Brenner, who is the gentleman in this left photo with me. Simeon Warren was my supervisor at NCPTT, and I'll talk a little bit about the work Simeon and I did later. But unfortunately, Simeon couldn't come with me to Bolivia because of some federal restrictions at the time of the internship. So Rusty generously agreed to come with us, and he was my teacher and my guide on site talking about the sculptures because he is a stonemason and works in cemetery conservation in the US. So he was a great resource. So we went around and looked at all of these, discussed some of the conditions that each stone was experiencing, and I just took a lot of notes for the first couple weeks. And then we also did a lot of diplomatic work. So this middle photo is Aliki and Alan. Aliki is one of the professors that was with us from Utah Valley University. She's an architect, and she was also one of my teachers on site. And then Alan was our tour guide and fabulous interpreter. And so this is them doing a press conference. So a lot of the work we had to do was just meeting with people, building a relationship of trust and understanding between us and not only the people who manage the site, but also Bolivian people in general, because the site is very important and there has been like strained relationships between the US and Bolivia in the past. So a lot of diplomatic work was important for this project. And then this right picture is just me doing some condition mapping on site. Okay, so writing the report, this is the second part of my project. For this part of the project, I went to Natchitoches, Louisiana, and as I said before, I went to school in Louisiana, so I was happy to be back. Um, I worked with Simeon, who is, you can see Simeon in this picture on the right. Simeon Warren is the Chief of Architecture and Engineering at the National Center for Preservation Technology and Training, NCPTT. And so we worked together on really like starting to compile all this data and all of these drawings that I had from the site into a readable report. And we were also collaborating with the Utah Valley University people on some of the work that they did to include in our report as well. And so this picture on the left is the National Cane River Heritage Area. I think we went to a few different sites in Louisiana that were National Park Service sites, so it was great to see a lot of these different places. And then this picture in the middle is the our report. So we called it the Stone Conservation Framework for the Cultural Landscape of the Tiwanaku World Heritage Site. It rolls off the tongue. It is intended to be a living document, so to be added onto by researchers and people working there in the future as well. So I'll talk a little bit about what was in the report. Mainly my part of the report was talking about the actual materials. So I studied the stones and did sort of a literature review of people who have studied them, before and learned about what these stones are, what their deterioration mechanisms are, how the environment affects them there, because it is a very harsh climate. So the two main stones there were andesite, which is an igneous rock, very similar to granite, and found along the Andes mountain range, and then sandstone, which is sedimentary. And so these two stones have different deterioration processes. And then we went ahead and used the ICOMOS stone glossary to define what the conditions were that were affecting these stones. So we talked about cracks, we talked about spalling, erosion, inappropriate patching material, biological growth, etc. And so just going and like defining these things so that we can map it and understand it. So this is just a small example of some of the stuff that's in the report. We used a lot of archival images, which it's great that we had access to them. And so this is the west elevation of the Sun Gate, which is kind of the back of it. So we compared these archival images to modern images that we took, and that smaller picture is some of my field notes from condition mapping. So I measured some of the cracks. I just wrote down like what I saw with my eyes. It was really important to be able to be there because I could not do that through a photograph. And then we made measure drawings, just basic measurements, and then the conditions drawings. And from here, I was able to look at how the conditions are aligning with each other throughout all of the facades and kind of do an analysis of what was affecting them and why, and write an analysis. And then Simeon and I are writing recommendations for how to treat those. So overall, the experience was just amazing. When I showed up, it's this wonderful group of people, half of which spoke very little Spanish and half of which spoke very little English. And so I thought, wow, this is going to make for a lot of awkward silence. It did not. Despite not having a shared language, we found a lot in common and taught each other bits and pieces of our languages and found a way to communicate. And so that was really wonderful. We had a lot of help from our hosts at the site. In the upper left there, you can see these are our host Luis's parents, and they are Aymara and have lived in the village of Tiwanaku for generations. And so they just welcomed us into their home and showed us a lot of like the beautiful artworks and craft works that people there do. And we got to see a lot of like traditions. So we went to museums, but we also saw dancing traditions like in person, and learned a lot of. Luis, our host, took the time to teach us a lot of the traditional dances, which was so fun. And then we also got to explore. We went to La Paz, so you can see in this upper right photo, I am terrified of heights, but went on this gondola and it was great. And got to see La Paz from above. We went to the lake in that bottom middle photo. And so, yeah, I made a lot of really great friends and colleagues, and it was a life-changing experience. So I just want to say thank you or gracias. Let me utilize my newly learned Spanish. Um, Thank you so much to everybody at World Heritage USA. I was so honored to be selected for this. And Caitlin did such a fantastic job. I think Sabina mentioned it too, just like introducing us to each other and organizing all of this. She was a great resource. And I also wanted to thank the people who helped teach me how to do this report. Simeon and Rusty and Aliki were all just fantastic resources the entire time. And I was really grateful to just be able to be allowed on this site. So the site directors and management, I just wanted to thank them too, because it was very special to be allowed to interact with this site and be a part of this project. And I also wanted to thank Mac Watson, who was on the board of my internship last year, who actually told me to apply for this. So without Mac, I probably would not have applied for this, and I'm just very grateful to have had the opportunity.